I turned 68 this year, and my life has grown so quiet, so routine, it sometimes feels like I've become part of the wallpaper. I've been married to Richard for 40 years. That's 4 decades of making his coffee just the way he likes it, of folding laundry with hospital corner precision, of remembering everyone's favorite dishes, even when no one remembers mine. Our home in Cedar Glen, Oregon is always spotless. Every floorboard polished, every towel folded just so, every window washed with care. I know which cabinet creaks when you open it too fast, and which bulb always flickers in the hallway. I've tended to this house like a garden, one I thought would one day reward me with warmth and appreciation. Instead, it's grown colder. When I was younger, I believed in the idea of sacrifice. I believed love was about giving everything you had, and that one day, when everyone was taken care of, it would be my turn. I'd imagined lazy mornings reading on a sunlit porch, maybe even taking a trip to the coast. I thought once the kids were grown and Richard's career had settled, he'd turn to me, not just as a fixture in the house, but as a person, as a woman. But that day never came. My daughter Vanessa is all grown now. She lives just 20 minutes away with her husband Jason and their little boy Liam. She's built a popular lifestyle brand online, all about the ideal family life. From holiday recipes to picture-perfect birthday celebrations, her feed is filled with curated images of love, laughter, and tradition. Sometimes I scroll through her posts and wonder who that mother is in the photos. It looks like me. But that woman is always smiling, always grateful, always glowing in golden light. The real me, the one behind the camera, has spent years being told not to complain, not to make things difficult, not to expect too much. Richard retired last year, though it's hard to tell. He still wakes up before dawn, still wears his old leather watch like he's got somewhere important to be. He's at the gym most mornings or out having coffee with the same few friends he's known since college. He never forgets his golf schedule, but he often forgets what day it is when it comes to things that matter to me. He's never been cruel, not in the way people imagine cruelty. He doesn't shout, doesn't hit. But there's a kind of meanness in indifference, in treating someone like a habit instead of a partner. He's mastered the art of tuning me out, of brushing off my concerns with a joke or a sigh. "You worry too much, Martha," he says, or worse, "You're too sensitive." Maybe I am. Maybe that's why I remember how many teaspoons of sugar Vanessa takes in her tea, or that Liam doesn't like the crust on his sandwiches. Maybe that's why I stopped putting peaches in the fruit salad years ago when Vanessa developed an allergy. I remember everything about them, not because I have to, but because I want to. That's what love looked like to me. Small acts, remembered details, and yet no one ever asks what I like. Not once has Richard asked if I'd like a different chair for my aching back, or if the lighting in the bedroom is too harsh for my eyes. No one's ever said, "Martha, what would you like to eat tonight?" They just assume I'll eat what's made, or make it myself if I'm so picky. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that I was just being dramatic, that a good mother, a good wife, didn't need grand gestures or recognition. But lately, that silence has started to press down on me. I feel it in my chest when I wake up in the morning. I feel it in my bones when I walk past the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. She looks tired. Not just from age, but from being unseen. It's not that they stopped needing me. It's that they never truly saw me in the first place. And as I stand here in this spotless kitchen, sunlight slipping through the windows, casting gold across the tiled floor I scrubbed just yesterday, I realize something. I've been loyal to everyone but myself. And maybe, just maybe, it's time that changed. It was a Saturday morning when I first heard the clatter of pots and pans coming from the kitchen. That alone was enough to throw me off. Richard is usually out jogging at that time, and the house is often still, filled only with the sound of birds outside and the slow hum of the fridge. But not that morning. As I stepped out of the bedroom and past the living room, I saw Liam, my 7-year-old grandson, glued to his tablet. Cartoons blared from the speakers. He didn't look up, didn't say good morning, just a flicker of light bouncing off his glasses as his fingers tapped the screen. Drawn by the smell of garlic and spices, I followed the noise into the kitchen and found Vanessa and her husband Jason rushing around like they were competing on a cooking show. The counters were covered in ingredients, mixing bowls and half-prepared dishes. Vanessa was chopping onions with speed and focus, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun, camera already mounted on a tripod in the corner. "Are we expecting company?" I asked, gently, forcing a smile. Without looking up, she laughed. "Mom, don't you remember? We're celebrating your birthday early. I've got a post scheduled for Monday. My audience loves Grateful Daughter Cares for Aging Mom content. This will be perfect." I blinked. My birthday was Tuesday. It was Saturday. They weren't doing this for me. They were doing it for clicks. Still, I nodded. I told myself it was the thought that counted, that maybe she just couldn't make it on the actual day. Maybe she meant well. But deep down, something tugged at me. Something hollow. The table was already filling with food, grilled steaks glistening with fat, garlic butter lobster tails, spicy beef stew. Jason was layering slices of roasted pork onto a platter like it was a magazine shoot. The only thing close to being mild was a shrimp dish, buried in a thick sauce of butter and paprika. I stood there, silent, as they continued preparing dishes I could barely chew. I haven't had real teeth in years. Dentures are a daily battle, and none of them had thought to ask what I could eat or what I liked. That stung. I sat down at the end of the table, smoothing the hem of my dress, trying to ignore the rising tightness in my throat. When Richard walked in a moment later, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, it felt so rehearsed I almost laughed. He didn't bring flowers, no card, no gift. He just grinned, wiped sweat from his brow, and said, "Wow, look at this. Looks like your mom's getting the royal treatment today, huh?" My smile faltered. On Richard's last birthday, Vanessa had booked a private room at a downtown restaurant. There were candles, champagne, a full 5-course meal. For me? A home-cooked performance. Vanessa adjusted the camera, checking the lighting. Then she turned to me, beaming a smile so perfect it could have been AI-generated. "Mom," she said, raising her glass, "no matter how busy life gets, our family always comes together for your special day. It's tradition." I felt cold. Every word was for the camera, every gesture rehearsed. Even Liam had been coached. He stood beside me stiffly, reciting lines. "Grandma, thank you for always taking care of me. I love you. Happy birthday." The moment ended, and everyone returned to their food styling. I watched as Vanessa moved a bowl 2 inches to the left. Jason adjusted the candles. Richard cracked a joke about getting his good side, and all I could think about was the cake. The only thing I'd asked for this year was a simple orange zest cake from my favorite bakery. Something light, soft, something I could actually eat. Richard had promised me he'd pick it up. "So," I asked, "where's the orange cake?" Richard didn't even blink. "Oh, right. I ran into Claudia this morning. She mentioned she'd been craving something sweet, so I gave it to her. Figured I'd grab another one later." The words hit me like ice water. Claudia. Again. He gave away my birthday cake to the woman who had hovered at the edge of our marriage for years, always just a friend, always conveniently around when I wasn't. Vanessa tried to cover. "We'll order another one, Mom. It'll look great on camera." I stared at her. On camera? That's when something in me broke. Not out of rage, but from clarity. A cold, clear realization. They didn't forget about me. They just didn't care. Not about my teeth, not about my birthday, not about my preferences or my presence. All they needed was my cooperation, to smile, to sit still, to play the loving matriarch while they curated their perfect content. To them, I was just another prop. I wasn't family, I was footage. And in that moment, as they fussed with their setup and argued about which angle looked best, I felt it, that sharp, breathless clarity that something had to change. Not next year, not someday. Now, the tea in my cup had gone cold, untouched. I stared at it, the bitter taste still lingering on my tongue from that first sip. Across the table, Vanessa adjusted the camera again, fussing over the lighting. Jason was double-checking the audio. Richard stood near the counter, sipping from his water bottle, completely unfazed by the storm that had begun to rise inside me. I glanced down at my hands, wrinkled, steady, and tired. These hands had held crying children, cooked thousands of meals, wiped away tears that were never my own. And now they sat uselessly in my lap, unseen, forgotten. My voice, when it came, was soft, almost too calm. "So, Richard, where's the cake I asked you to pick up?" You could feel the air tighten. Jason's hands froze mid-motion as he reached for the camera. Vanessa's head snapped up, irritation flashing across her face like a glitch in her otherwise flawless performance. Richard, as always, shrugged. "Like I said, I gave it to Claudia. She was having a rough morning. It's just a cake, Martha." He smiled, as if I were being childish. "Honestly," he added, "if it means that much to you, I'll grab another one tomorrow. No big deal." It was supposed to be nothing, a throwaway comment, brushed off like lint on a sleeve. But to me, it was everything. That cake had been the only thing I'd asked for. I hadn't requested a big gathering, hadn't expected gifts or flowers. I knew my body couldn't handle spicy food or tough meats, so I didn't even bother mentioning preferences. But the cake? I had dared to hope for that small kindness, a soft, citrusy slice of something I loved, and even that wasn't important enough to matter. I looked straight at him. If Claudia wanted cake, she could have bought her own. Or is she broke now? Or just so pathetic she needs handouts from another woman's husband? The silence hit like a dropped plate. Vanessa snapped, "Mom, that's completely out of line." Richard's eyes narrowed. "What is wrong with you today? You're 68 years old, acting like a spoiled teenager over a cake." He slammed his chopsticks down. "Look at this table. Vanessa and Jason cooked all this for you. You think that's not enough?" I stared at the mountain of food. The spicy, rich, camera-ready dishes I couldn't eat. The celebration that wasn't for me. I turned back to Vanessa. "Do you even know what I like to eat?" I asked. She blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "I've spent my entire life remembering every detail about you. Your allergies, your favorite teas, the exact way you like your omelets, and you—" My voice cracked but didn't break. "You couldn't even ask me what I wanted for dinner. You just assumed I'd be grateful to be included." Jason stepped in. "Martha, please, can we not ruin the mood?" I laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. "The mood? You mean this staged performance? This Instagram-worthy charade where I pretend I'm lucky to be surrounded by people who only see me when the camera's rolling?" That's when Richard pointed at me, voice rising. "You want to talk about gratitude? Why don't you try being more like Claudia? She's considerate. She doesn't make everything about herself. She doesn't throw tantrums over dessert." I froze. The insult didn't even hurt. It just confirmed what I'd always suspected. Vanessa's voice sliced through the tension. "You knew I'd be filming today, Mom, and you show up looking like that? No makeup, no effort? People are going to think we neglect you." I turned to her slowly. That was what she cared about, not how I felt, not what this day was supposed to mean, only the optics. "You want a show?" I said quietly, rising from my chair. "Here's your finale." Then I turned to Richard. "I want a divorce." The room fell into stunned silence. Jason's mouth fell open. Vanessa stood frozen, phone in hand, her perfectly curated world crashing down. Richard scoffed. "You're not serious," he said, laughing nervously. "All this over a cake?" "All this," I repeated, "is not about a cake. It's about 40 years of being invisible, 40 years of serving, smiling, staying silent, and I'm done." I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the hallway like a drumbeat. When I reached my bedroom, I pulled out a small suitcase I hadn't used in years. It had collected dust in the back of the closet, but I knew it was still strong, just like me. As I folded my clothes, I moved slowly, deliberately. Each shirt, each photo, each item I packed was a piece of myself I was reclaiming, not from them, but for me. I zipped it shut, lifted the handle, and took one final look around the room. The furniture, the curtains, the bed I'd made every day for decades. It all looked so hollow. When I stepped out into the living room again, they were still there, waiting, stunned. "Martha," Richard said, his voice low, uncertain now. "You don't have anywhere to go." I looked him dead in the eye. "I have everywhere to go." And with that, I walked out the front door, into the sunlight, into the unknown, into my new life. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't need to. The quiet click of the lock behind me was enough. It was soft, but it echoed like thunder in my chest. For 40 years, that house had been my world, every corner familiar, every wall steeped in memories. But as I stepped off the front porch, suitcase in hand, I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Cedar Glen. I walked slowly toward my car, the wheels of the suitcase humming gently behind me. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of it all finally being lifted. I wasn't sure where I was going at first. Hotels, motels, a friend's house? But my heart already knew. I drove for just under 2 hours, winding through forest-lined roads until I reached the edge of Willow Creek, a sleepy little town where time always seemed to slow. My mother's old house stood there, tucked behind a thicket of maple trees. It had been vacant for years, left untouched since she passed, but I still had the keys. I'd never sold it. Some part of me couldn't let it go, and now I knew why. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the scent of old wood and faint lavender hit me all at once. It was musty, untouched, but it was mine. No voices barking orders, no forced smiles, no cameras tracking my movements, just quiet, stillness, peace. The place was smaller than I remembered, just 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, creaky floors, but there was a strange comfort in that. The walls held no judgment. The air was free of pretense. I dropped my bag and stood in the center of the living room for a long while, letting the silence settle over me like a warm shawl. Then I rolled up my sleeves. I spent the rest of that day cleaning, mopping the floors, wiping down windows, beating the dust from the curtains. My body ached, but my spirit, it stirred. For the first time in years, I was doing something for me, not because anyone expected it, not for content, not for approval, not to hold a family together with scotch tape and tolerance. By nightfall, I collapsed onto the twin bed in the guest room, too tired to even change out of my clothes. And still, I slept deeper than I had in years. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, soft and golden. I sat up slowly, my back sore, my knees stiff, but my heart lighter. I brewed a pot of black tea in the old kettle, the one with the chipped handle Mom had always used. The whistle sounded strange but familiar, like a forgotten lullaby. I sipped my tea by the window and looked out over the tiny backyard. It was overgrown and wild, but beautiful in its own way. A small bird pecked at the feeder I'd filled years ago, and I smiled, because for the first time I had nowhere to be. No one to cook for, no role to perform. I was alone, but I was free. Still, even freedom has a way of feeling heavy when you've been caged for too long. That afternoon, I opened the hall closet and found a plastic storage bin marked Crafts, Mom. Inside were crochet hooks, yarn in faded pastel colors, old quilting patterns, and a little notebook filled with my mother's handwriting. Each page detailed her techniques, stitch by stitch, square by square. I hadn't touched a needle in decades, but something about that moment, holding her book, touching the soft worn yarn, made me want to try again. I started small. A washcloth, a simple stitch, no pressure to finish anything, just motion, just rhythm, and with each loop, I felt something begin to return. Not just the muscle memory, but the comfort, the control, the quiet joy. By the end of the week, I had crocheted 3 washcloths and a small pillowcase. They weren't perfect, some stitches uneven, some corners slightly crooked, but they were mine. And that was more than enough. It wasn't long before I thought of Grace. Grace had been my mother's caregiver during her final months, a gentle, patient woman who had a passion for quilting and ran community workshops downtown. I remembered her inviting me to a craft co-op once, saying, "Women like you, you've got hands that tell stories." Back then, I'd laughed it off. I was too busy, too tired, too consumed with keeping a family functioning. But now, sitting in this little kitchen, surrounded by yarn and soft morning light, her words echoed differently. Maybe it was time to call her, not because I needed company, but because I was finally ready to rebuild something of my own. Calling Grace felt like reopening a door I didn't realize I'd closed. Her voice on the other end of the line was just as warm and gentle as I remembered. "Martha," she said, surprised but delighted, "you have no idea how happy I am to hear from you." She didn't ask why I'd disappeared. She didn't pry into my divorce or what had finally made me leave. She simply invited me to the next community craft circle at the Willow Creek Community Center. "No pressure," she said. "Just come see what we've been working on. Bring yarn if you feel like stitching. Or don't." That Saturday, I packed a small tote bag with my crocheting supplies and walked the 10 blocks to the center. The room buzzed with soft laughter and quiet conversation. Women of all ages sat in a loose circle, hands busy, hearts open. Grace was in the center, her presence calm and grounding. When she spotted me, she stood up and wrapped me in a hug that said more than words could. I found a seat and pulled out my yarn, unsure if my hands remembered how to move in front of others. But within minutes, I was stitching in rhythm, the loop of each thread calming my nerves. The woman beside me, Cora, a retired teacher, glanced over and smiled. "That's lovely work," she said. "Have you been doing this long?" "Not in a while," I admitted. "Well, it's like riding a bike," she said, nodding approvingly. "It always comes back." I left that day feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. There was no audience, no script, no pressure, just women sharing their time, their stories, their skills. I began going every week, and with Grace's gentle nudging, I even agreed to lead a session on beginner crochet techniques. To my surprise, people showed up. 12 women, maybe more. Some hadn't held a crochet hook in decades, others had never tried. But they watched me, really watched, and listened. And when I spoke, I didn't stumble or shrink. I taught with ease. My voice didn't shake. That night, Grace approached me after class. "You've got a gift," she said. "Not just in your hands, but in how you make people feel capable, seen." I laughed softly. "I'm just doing what my mother taught me." Then maybe it's time more people learned it too. With her help, I started teaching regular workshops, crochet, quilting, hand stitching. We set up a booth at the local market to sell handmade scarves and pillows. At first it was just pocket money, a new spool of yarn here, a cup of tea there, but the booth gained attention. People returned, asked for custom pieces, shared their own stories of stitching and memory. Soon after, Grace came up with the name Knots and Threads. "We're not just selling fabric," she said. "We're stitching lives back together, piece by piece." We created a small logo, a simple threaded needle inside a heart, and began packaging our items with handwritten tags. Each tag included the name of the woman who made it and a tiny note about what inspired the piece. Some notes were whimsical. "Inspired by my grandmother's kitchen curtains." Others were intimate. "Created during the first week after I left a 30-year marriage." People responded. Customers weren't just buying scarves, they were buying connection. They sent messages, left notes, emailed stories of their own. Women in their 60s, 70s, even 80s reached out to say they had found purpose again after years of feeling invisible. Younger women said our page gave them comfort, a kind of handmade gentleness in a loud, fast world. At Grace's encouragement, and with the help of Lila, a young neighbor who started helping with deliveries, we began filming short video tutorials, just 10-minute clips: how to start a basic stitch, how to patch a quilt, how to hand bind a hem. I sat in front of a simple backdrop, nothing fancy. Just me, my yarn, and my stories. The videos caught on. Slowly at first, then more rapidly. We didn't go viral. We didn't have fancy transitions or trending music. But what we had was sincerity, real warmth, real craft. One afternoon, Lila made a suggestion. "You should try live streaming," she said, eyes sparkling. "People would love to talk to you in real time." I hesitated. "I'm almost 70, Lila." "All the more reason," she smiled. "You have something to say, and people want to hear it." So, I tried. Nervously, awkwardly. The first live stream had 3 people watching, but by the end of the month, that number had grown to hundreds. Viewers tuned in from all over, small towns, big cities. They didn't just want to learn to stitch. They wanted to hear how I left after 40 years, how I started again, how I found peace. And the truth is, I hadn't set out to be anything more than a woman with a needle and thread, trying to heal. But somewhere in the rhythm of stitching fabric, I'd stitched myself back together too. 3 years passed faster than I expected. The seasons in Willow Creek moved with a gentle rhythm. Spring rains softening the soil, summer sun warming the studio windows, autumn turning the trees outside my condo golden and wise. My life had found a new pace, one stitched from peace and purpose. Knots and threads flourished in ways I never imagined. The little brand that began with washcloths and weekend markets now had a steady online following and a full workshop calendar. I had found joy. I had found myself. And then, one quiet Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I thought it was Lila, maybe dropping off her latest video edits or that new spool of ocean blue yarn I'd ordered. But when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was Vanessa. Her hair was shorter now, bluntly cut. Her eyes, once bright and calculating, were sunken, exhausted. Her designer clothes hung awkwardly on her frame. The gloss, the confidence, the curated shine she had always carried, it was gone. She stepped inside without asking, just collapsed onto my couch like a broken marionette. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," she said. And then, as if the words had freed something inside her, she began to cry. Not the polished, soft sobs you show on camera, but raw, guttural cries. The kind that come from somewhere deep, somewhere that knows the truth has arrived, whether you're ready for it or not. She told me everything. How Richard, after I left, had invited Claudia to move in. How the old flame turned soulmate quickly turned controlling, manipulative, and reckless. Claudia drained his retirement account, pressured him into shady financial decisions, and convinced Vanessa to sell one of her rental properties to keep things comfortable. She racked up debts, opened credit cards in Richard's name, and disappeared when everything collapsed. Richard had a heart attack the month after she left. Now he was wheelchair-bound, bitter, and broke. Vanessa's online following dwindled. Her picture-perfect persona cracked under the pressure of real life. Brand sponsors pulled out. The comments turned sour. Jason left. She was raising Liam alone, struggling to make ends meet. And then she looked at me. "Dad keeps saying his last wish is to see you again," she whispered. "I don't know if he means it. I don't even know if it matters. But he's not the same, and I'm not either." I said nothing. I handed her a glass of water and gently asked her to leave once she finished it. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The silence was heavier than usual. Not oppressive, but reflective. The woman I was 3 years ago would have wept, would have rushed in to fix, to save, to soften the blows for everyone else. But that woman no longer lived here. Still, something inside me knew I had to see it through. Not for closure, not for him, for me. I drove to the rehab facility the next day. The air smelled like antiseptic and wilted lilies. When I stepped into Richard's room, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel affection. I just felt done. He looked up slowly. His skin was pale, his shoulders hunched. Time had stripped the power from his voice, the pride from his posture. "Martha," he croaked, "you came." I nodded. I regret it all," he said, breath hitching. "If I'd brought that cake, would it have changed anything?" I shook my head gently. "No, Richard, the cake was just the last thread in a cloth that had already unraveled." He closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. I stood there for a few moments longer, then turned and left. Outside, the sky was clear and bright. The breeze carried the scent of wildflowers from the field nearby. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. That was the real ending. Not the divorce, not the live streams, not the fall of a man who once believed he owned everything, including me. The ending was standing there in the sun, unburdened, alive. Vanessa and Liam visit occasionally now. The visits are quiet, unforced. There are no cameras, no expectations. Vanessa doesn't try to rewrite the past. I don't try to change who she is. We meet in the middle, and that's enough. Grace and I still run knots and threads, though now it's more about mentorship than money. We started a program called Crafting a New Chapter, workshops for women over 50 looking to reclaim their voices, their creativity, their peace. We tell them it's never too late to begin again. Last month, I treated myself to a full set of dental implants. When the work was done, I went straight to a little diner near the town square and ordered the fried chicken platter and a warm peach cobbler. I took slow bites, chewed fully, smiled wide. It wasn't just about the food. It was about finally having the strength to taste life on my own terms. And I know now, the second half of my life isn't about surviving for others. It's about living, fully, freely, and finally, for me. Martha Whitaker's story is not just about divorce. It's not even just about betrayal or family dysfunction or late-life reinvention. At its heart, it's about rediscovering self-worth, about a woman who, after 40 years of being invisible in her own home, finally chooses to see herself again. Too often, especially as women age, they are expected to fade into the background, to nurture others, to sacrifice silently, to endure without complaint. They become the keepers of tradition, the emotional glue of the family, and in the process, they forget who they were before the titles of wife, mother, or grandmother consumed them. Martha's journey reminds us that love without respect is not love, and that loyalty at the cost of your soul is not virtue. The moment she walked out that door with nothing but a suitcase and her name, Martha reclaimed something priceless, her voice. And from that act of quiet rebellion grew a new life, one filled with creativity, community, and peace. She didn't chase revenge or approval. She simply chose herself, one stitch at a time. The message is clear. It is never too late to begin again. Whether you're 68 or 80, your dreams, your needs, and your happiness still matter. You are not too old, you are not too late, and you are certainly not selfish for choosing freedom over performance. So wherever you are in life, whether you're quietly enduring or desperately searching for something more, remember this: your story is still being written, and the most beautiful chapters might just begin the moment you finally say, "I matter too."